Hey guys, it's Reggie with fulltimerep.com, and in this video I'll be comparing the Sony 12-24 versus the Sony 16-35 wide-angle zoom lenses to help you decide which one is best for your hybrid photo and video workflow when shooting real estate. Now this won't be so much a technical analysis on these two specific lenses, which are the f2.8 G Masters, but more a practical look at the differences between an ultra-wide and a standard wide zoom lens. So for example, if you're a Canon shooter, this might help you decide between the RF10-20 and the RF15-35, or any other lens manufacturer that offers multiple wide-angle zoom lenses at these similar focal lengths. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's start with the first and most obvious difference when looking at these two lenses. The 16-35 features a flat front element and accepts 82mm threaded filters, which allows you to add polarizers, variable ND filters, or even clear UV filters to protect against scratches. The 12-24 features a bulbous front element, so if you wanted to add, say, ND filters for example, you need to get a custom fitted one and drop it in the back. You'd also have to remove the lens each time you wanted to switch between different stops of light. To be fair though, I've never needed to use an ND filter for wide-angle video shots because I can always increase the f-stop and it doesn't make a major difference with the composition. That said, I like the option of having threads on the front and being able to screw on even a UV protective filter, which I use to protect all of my glass. So the point in this category goes to the 16-35. These lenses are going to feel pretty similar in size and build. The 12-24 is slightly longer, wider, and heavier, partially because of the built-in lens hood. But with the internal zoom feature, the barrel on the 12-24 doesn't extend when you change focal lengths, which is handy for video work when you're flying the camera on a gimbal so you don't have to worry about the balance being thrown off. When you're at 16mm on the 16-35, the barrel is extended by about an inch and retracts as you zoom into 35. So switching focal lengths as you go might put some strain on those gimbal motors, but otherwise it won't make a difference when you're shooting stills from a tripod. So for this category, we'll call it a draw. Moving on to the next category, I wanted to compare how the composition differed between the two setups when getting wide shots. If you haven't learned about composition and verticals yet, I'll leave a link to another video where I discuss those topics in depth. But in a nutshell, it's best to frame your wide-angled shots showing only two walls, because as you begin to reveal additional walls, the shape of the room, which in reality is a square or a rectangle, begins to look more like a trapezoid or a rhombus. Am I using those right? Anyway, with this rule in mind, as we look at the 12mm shot framed from the corner of the room, we actually can see all four walls. So I'm gonna punch in here to around 16mm to get the right framing. Let's look here at another example because 12mm might help me shoot a tight kitchen space. But again, it's so wide that it reveals the edges of the cabinets and the countertop, making them look like a funky parallelogram. So again, I end up cropping into 16mm to hide those edges, and even though these lines are still diverging a bit, the composition looks much more believable in my opinion. What if we squeeze in tighter to just show the washer and dryer? Well then we're still getting some wall in the foreground, which just looks sloppy. So even though it shows a bit less of the actual space, the 16mm shot is better for the overall composition. So while in theory the 12mm might give you a wider composition, in practice it just wasn't usable for me in most situations. But there's still hope for the 12-24 because things start to look better around 14mm. For example, this small bathroom looks alright at 16mm, but at 14mm it feels a bit less cramped. It's not a perfect image, you can see the towel hook at the edge, and yes, the lines start diverging, but the lights aren't getting cut off anymore and we don't feel so squished against the sink. That said, even if we only get 1 to 2mm of added versatility, then I have to give the point to the 12-24 for this category. But now let's talk about tight shot composition, also known as detail shots. These types of shots are mostly used to market architecture or furniture and can create that high-end feel when marketing luxury real estate. So for these shots, I usually stop down to f2.8 and then I try to frame the focal point with something blurry in the foreground. And this is where getting the f2.8 lens actually makes a big difference in my opinion, because with the f4 lenses, you almost don't get enough bokeh to pull it off, and it ends up looking like you just messed up on the framing. So let's start with the 12-24. Zooming in as much as we can, it just doesn't get quite tight enough to pull this one off, but I can't say I didn't expect it. So now with the 16-35 zoomed all the way in at 35mm, this is something I can work with. The blurred edges of the composition create depth without taking too much of the frame, and I could always apply a little crop in post if needed. So the 16-35 easily takes the point in this category. But if you wanted to take it a step further, here's what 50mm looks like, and again at 70mm, shot by their big brother, the Sony 24-70 f2.8. For this shot, my favorite focal length is definitely 50mm, but let me know down in the comments which focal length length you prefer. And for the record, this shot of the sink is just for demonstration purposes, and I would not send a shot like this to the client. But there is one other tight shot that could work for this situation, and that's the straight on angle of these cabinets. At 24 millimeters, if I border up to the top edge, this actually looks pretty nice. And if I step back a bit to zoom into 35 millimeters, it actually feels a bit too cramped. That being said, 24 millimeters is still within the range of the 16 to 35, so no change to the scoring for this category. In regards to lens distortion, if we look a bit closer at that last cabinet shot at 24 millimeters, the horizontal lines on the 12-24 subtly have more warp in them. And this is even more pronounced when comparing both lenses at 16 millimeters, where you can see objects like the light and this panel here are distorting far more on the 12-24. Now with the still photos in Lightroom, we can just check the lens profile corrections, and it does an amazing job correcting that barrel distortion with hardly any effort. But since we're talking about a hybrid workflow, then we'll also be seeing that distortion show up in videos. And most NLEs used for video editing don't have a handy lens profile correction button like the one in Lightroom. So if we applied lens profile corrections, this category could be a draw, but I'm going to give the point to the 16 to 35 for the best appearance out of camera. Aside from the wide and tight shots of the interior, you'll also need to shoot the exterior. And in most cases, I prefer the compressed look that you get with a tighter focal length. The wider you go, the closer you have to stand to the house, but especially on taller houses, this doesn't look good. And if you stand further back with a wide lens, you just get more driveway and sky in the shot, which isn't great for composition. So the point for this category again goes to the 16 to 35 for providing that extra 11 millimeters of reach. So the last category is price, and retailing at $3,000, the 12 to 24 costs more than most camera bodies, versus $2,300 for the 16 and 35, which is more reasonable, but by no means cheap. Now these are the f2.8 G Master versions, and the f4 models of the same lenses from Sony are gonna be about half the price, coming in close to $1,800 and $1,200 respectively. Either way, you're paying a premium for the ultra wide, so the point here again goes to the 16-35. So when considering all the factors, the 16-35 comes out on top. It's going to be lighter, less expensive, more adaptable with filters, and more versatile when moving between wide and tight shots. So with that information, why would any real estate photographer buy a 12 to 24? I'd say the only practical use is for shooters going after luxury listings who don't want to be held back in any situation by their equipment. Especially when paired with a 24-70, you're going to be getting that ultra wide 14 to 15 usable millimeters and the tighter 50 to 70 millimeter look with your other lens. But for the added cost, the space in your bag, and the hassle to switch between lenses on the job, the 16-35 is clearly the best option for beginners who are still practicing with composition, or for the experienced shooter who requires efficiency and speed in their workflow. But that does it for this video, and if you found it useful, consider giving it a thumbs up for the algorithm and subscribe to be notified when I post new content. If you're someone who's just getting started in real estate media, looking to master both the creative and the business aspects in the least amount of time possible, then head over to fulltimerep.com, where I've created the most comprehensive course on the subject. There's tutorials on photography, videography, creating virtual tours, and most importantly, how to market yourself and get clients. But that's it for this video. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one. You almost don't get enough bokeh? 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 So for this category, we'll call it a draw. It's not a draw. It's not a draw. Or it is a draw. It is a draw.